Now, the good news that I have for you is that mounting file systems is probably easier than mounting horses. When we look at mounting our file system, it's mounting the device to the mount point. For unmounting or U-mount, we can either U-mount the device or the mount point. If we want to persist the mount, then we can put it in our etc fs tab, our file system table. We can mount by the label, we can mount by the device name, but we can also use the UUID to mount the file system. This is going to ensure that we're uniquely identifying that file system. To retrieve the UUID of the file system, we can use the block ID command. But I think we need to investigate some of this. Shall we move back out to our command line? So welcome back to my glorious command line, a command line where we know we are going to be getting some great practice. So come on, let's dive in and do some. Now we know we've got some file systems, but our file systems are going to be inaccessible to us until we mount them. We mount them to directories or mount points. If I go back to my good friend ls block, we're able to go through and specify that we only need to include our major device 7, our loop devices. And if we put the -F option, we see the file systems. So we can see our glorious XFS file system and ext4. We can go through and see the labels that we assigned, marketing and sales, and we can see the universally unique identifiers. When mounting our file systems, we can either use the device name, and that's the default, or we can tag it with the label, or tag it with the UUID. Now, the reason why we would do that is because the device that we're using today, let's say loop 16, that might change. It might be 15 tomorrow, or it might be 17 tomorrow. So there's no consistency necessarily in the order in which these loop devices are created. A consistency, though, that we can guarantee if we use the label or the UUID. So let's begin by mounting our XFS file system. So sudo and mount, we have to elevate our privileges to use mount. And we're going to specify that we're going to use the UUID equals. So we're tagging the data and we're going to copy the UUID. We're certainly not going to go through and type it in. Once we're done with that, that's the device that we're mounting. We're mounting it to the target, our mount point, which is /MNT. We can authenticate into the system to put in the password. And now our file system will be mounted and accessible. If I go back through my history, I can go back to my ls block command, and we can see now the file system utilization. When I look at the mount directory, though, I don't see any content. But there is no default content with XFS, so we have to add it in. But let me go back with the ls command and take a look at the permissions. So let's do an ls-l. But I'm going to include the option D, so we look at the directory rather than inside of the directory. Now, looking at the permissions, I can see the only W for write is assigned to the root user. So as the tux user, I can't write into this directory in any case. So let's go back and look at the echo command, a great way that we can write to our screen. But don't forget, we can redirect this to sudo and T and send it through to our mount directory /MNT. And then why don't we just call it file1 just for ease? So we've written to the screen, but also to the file. If I now look at my mount directory, then my file now is stored permanently in my file system. As I say, it is permanent, or at least permanent until I delete it. But if I unmount the file system using the command umount, and then the directory or mount point that we want to unmount, we can see now that I no longer have content. But of course, the content is still in the file system, but the file system is no longer mounted. But again, let's quickly go back through my history and take a look at listing our block devices. And I can see then that we're using the sales label. So let's try mounting the sales label for my ext4 file system. So I can use sudo mount. We can tag label and then put in the value of sales. But when I look now inside of my /mnt directory, I do have content. And that's just the way ext4 file systems are. They have a management directory where data that doesn't seem to have any parent entry is then put for help later. If I umount it, we can tidy things up, and we are done and dusted with our glorious mounting, or at least for the moment.